Okay, so hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Capital Technologies University Cybersecurity Awareness Month presentation. My name is Dr. Kellogg Charles. Capital Technology University is located in Laurel, Maryland, centered in one of America's most vibrant technology corridors, which is between Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. In observation of the month-long event, we will be providing some informative topics that will coincide with the theme for each week. The theme for this week is Be Cybersmart. As our lives have become increasingly dependent on technology, virtually all personal and business data is kept on internet-connected platforms, which can be a goldmine for bad actors. The first full week of Cybersecurity Awareness Month will highlight the best security practices and focus on general cyber hygiene to keep your information safe. Presenting today is Jim Goepel, Director of Education and Content at FutureFeed, an organization with the mission to lead in securing our nation's supply chain from adversaries by creating an affordable, collaborative IT management platform. Jim has a broad range of legal, technical, and business expertise. He is the founding director and former board treasurer at the CMMC-AB board, as well as a candidate for the CMMC Provisional Instructor and a candidate for the CMMC Provisional Assessor, and the author and instructor for the CMMC-AB Registered Practitioner Program. Jim regularly speaks at security conferences. He is a professor of cybersecurity at Drexel University. Hello, Jim, and thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Charles. So I'm really excited to be here today. We're gonna, as Dr. Charles said, we're gonna talk about internet and computer safety as part of Cybersecurity Month. This is a really important topic. This is actually something that I teach at Drexel. The class, so the way I got involved with Drexel was that I approached them and said, you know, I'm a lawyer. I happen to also be an engineer. I happen to have a technical background, but I know the lawyers and actually a lot of the business people that I talk with, they don't really understand cybersecurity either. They don't understand the impacts of them and why they need to pay attention to it. We need to start teaching classes around that. And I got both the business school and the law school to agree that, yes, we actually do need something like that. As I taught early versions of the class, I, like most people, would jump into the gory technical details first and really overwhelm the students. And it was very difficult. I could see the students the first couple of weeks kind of struggling with some of the concepts. And it brought me back to when I was in school. As an engineer, a lot of times you learn the math first and then you learn the science, because the science and the engineering pieces of it, you need to know the math in order to really be able to do it well. Well, the way I learned best was actually the other way around. Once I was exposed to something, it was easier for me to invest the time and energy to then learn all the underlying concepts. It gave me a motivation to actually do those things. And I've actually restructured my course to teach it from this perspective instead, which is, although we're going to talk about cybersecurity, and although cybersecurity, we tend to think of it as a business problem, at the end of the day, the biggest cause of cybersecurity breaches aren't misconfigured systems, aren't anything the hackers trying to break in and getting into a system. It's not some geek sitting in the basement working away, toiling away for hours and hours on end, trying to find their way like you see in Hollywood. The biggest problem are people. We make stupid mistakes. We do simple things that we should do, or there are simple things that we should do that would make our lives better and make us more secure, and by extension, make our employers more secure or make our campuses more secure. So that's what I want to focus on today, is actually steps that you can take, and really understanding first why you need to take those steps. And then we'll talk about the steps that you can take And at the very end, I have a couple of videos that I'll give you the links for that I think are well worth watching if you're really interested in, or even moderately interested in cybersecurity. If you think I'm crazy and some of the risks that I'm identifying are off the mark, you should watch some of the videos because there's some really good stuff, and I'll talk about those at the end. But I want to start by telling two stories. The first one is what happened with the US electrical grid. So if you're not familiar with it, we have power plants around the country. Every power plant is responsible for generating the electricity for the homes and businesses around it. Well, what happens when you have to take a power plant offline? What happens when you need to do maintenance on it? You need to clean it, you do whatever. They realized many decades ago that we need to actually connect the power plants together. And then if one of them goes offline, it's not really a big deal because we can just, the others will pitch in and make enough electricity to take its place, at least in the short term. So this is a great thing. I was actually an engineer and helped design some of the equipment that makes the electrical grid work. So we have these massive cross-country transmission lines. You send power all over the place. That obviously, that grid now, the interconnection of those power plants is kind of important. And if the electrical grid goes down, we have no way of providing power to not only the one region where a particular electrical utility was, or a power plant was, but now multiple sites and potentially whole geographic regions. So this is a really big deal. Well, in 2017, and actually late 2017, early 2018, a guy out in California and his computer was infected. They're not exactly sure how. It was either by him clicking on a link that was that sent him to a malicious site, or he just visited a site that was infected, or there was an email attachment that was infected. It's one of the three. Last I checked, they still hadn't figured out the exact way that the attackers got in, but he worked for this little construction company out in California, and that company does excavating work. They somewhere along the lines, they kind of do some work for the power companies. Whenever there's like new equipment that needs to be installed and built, they'll help dig the foundations for it. Not really a company that you would think of as being a target from a cybersecurity perspective. But our adversaries know, the people that really want to take out, and believe it or not, there are both nation state actors, so other adversarial nations, as well as organizations that are trying for organized crime purposes, for all sorts of criminal purposes. They want to take down the electrical grid. They can hold it ransom. They can make lots of money by doing these things, or they can cause other kinds of problems for us. So they're always trying to find ways to take out that electrical grid. Well, they identified, they know that the big companies, the power plants themselves, and the top tier contractors who help those power plants to be up and running or to stay running, they know that those folks are paying at least a reasonable amount of attention to their cybersecurity programs. So what they realized was, if we start a couple tiers down, if we look at companies like that excavating company, they don't see themselves as being likely targets for cybersecurity attacks. Let's go take a look at them. They did. They found, sure enough, that this gentleman, his account was an easy one to attack. They established a presence in his account to the point where they could send out emails with malicious attachments in them from his computer. So it's not like they were just impersonating him. They actually had control of his account. And when people responded, when they replied and said, hey, is this really from you? The attackers, before the guy even got to see it, the attackers would see the email and respond and say, yes, this is legitimate. Please open it. The invoice is overdue. We need to get payment from you in the next 5 days or next day. So there were lots of people who fell for those emails. So the attackers come in, they take over his computer, they then use his computer and his email address to send out infected attachments to lots of other people. They work their way up, and they eventually get to a company that plugs their computer equipment into the electrical grid. And so the bad guys were able to do what's called island hopping and jump from the low-hanging easy targets all the way up to a computer that let them get on the electrical grid. Thankfully, they were caught before they could do anything truly malicious, but they almost took out the entire West Coast's electrical grid. The portion that they were on had the ability to take out the entire West Coast's electricity. My dad lives in North Jersey. We were hit by Hurricane Sandy a few years ago. When that happened, the power surges and other problems that came from the hurricane caused my father to lose power for over 3 weeks. When you think about losing power, typically you think about a day, 2 days. When you get to that 3-week mark, it's a whole other ball of wax. All your food is rotten. You're lucky to be staying warm in your home if it's wintertime. There's all sorts of secondary and really significant issues that come from the loss of that power. If the bad guys could not only turn off the power, but actually cause the electrical equipment to explode or to break, now we have to remanufacture all of those things. That all takes time. There's all financial investments. There's all sorts of problems with that. That can wreak significant havoc on a particular geographic region. Again, the bad guys know this. That's what their target is. And so one little person in, I think it was actually Oregon or Washington State, he was the reason, or was almost the reason, that kind of catastrophe happened on the West Coast. I certainly wouldn't want to be that person. I don't like the idea of being the cause of many people potentially losing their lives or losing their heat in their homes, etc. So I tend to take cybersecurity a little more seriously. But then again, this is my career. This is what I do. So I do like this stuff. But to me, like that's a very real potential threat, and that's it is. I know it sounds crazy, and I know it sounds like hyperbole, but I can assure you that these kinds of attacks are happening all the time, and that is exactly what our adversaries are trying to do. They're trying to target you as an individual and get you to slip up so that they can get in. And so one of the ways that the attackers do that is through the thing on the second part of the slide, which is when websites are breached, when the usernames and passwords from one site are breached, the attackers will consolidate all of that. You'll get millions and literally billions of usernames and passwords that are out there on the dark web that anybody can grab at any time. And so what do the criminals do with that? Well, first thing they do is they now have a list of usernames and passwords, and they don't just go back. If let's say there was a breach at Netflix and they got your Netflix username and password, in the grand scheme of things, that's probably not a big deal, except unfortunately, many people reuse the same username and password across multiple sites, and the attackers know this. So now they try your Netflix password somewhere else, Disney Plus. And this actually happened with Disney Plus. When the site first launched a couple years ago, within a week of its launch, there were usernames and passwords available on the dark web for Disney Plus, and it caused a huge uproar within the cybersecurity community. How could Disney launch a service like this in these times, knowing that hackers are out there trying to do this all the time? And it turned out that every one of those accounts was where the user had reused the same username and password from that was actually available from a breach. So making sure that you follow some really basic safety steps, like not reusing your passwords, is important. Another way that the attackers will use that kind of information is actually to create a database of known passwords. And what they'll do is they'll sort and find the top 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 passwords, and they will sit there and they'll use computers and automate it, but they'll sit there and try a username and every one of those passwords as a combination. I run multiple websites. I get alerts on a regular basis of people trying those kinds of things against some of my websites. So almost on a daily basis, I see people trying, they'll find one of the usernames that's associated with my website, and they'll start trying passwords. And I can see that their login attempts are failing. This happens all the time. And it's not just sites like mine. Every website out there, they are trying this on a regular basis. If you have a bank account and you bank online, they know that that bank account numbers are a combination. Typically, it's a 6-digit number, 6 to 8-digit number. And so they will try a number and a password, and they will keep trying a number and a different password, and until they are successful at getting in. So there are lots of ways that the criminals use this information to try to gain access to information. They are not targeting you necessarily for some of these acts. Now, if they're trying to work their way up the chain to a vulnerable target, and to a target, and they see you as an entry point, they may actually target you. But in a lot of cases, what they're going to do is they're going to what they call spray and pray. So they're going to try a bunch of different things and hope that they get in. So you may not think that you are a likely target for a cybersecurity incident, but believe me, your information is out there, and the attackers are trying every account that they can get. And they will look for your information in the most unlikely of places. Believe it or not, college students are normally very regularly targeted with different kinds of attacks. Many of them are spam. They're fake emails trying to get you to open an attachment or click on a link. And the reason that they're doing that is they know when financial aid season comes, so that they'll typically try to pretend to be a financial aid provider or a bank, and they want access to those funds. Some of them even want access to the intellectual property that you have access to. So you may have your library online, or you'll have access to different research materials that are online. Some folks in some countries don't have access to those things, and they want to be able to get that so they can steal the information. There's lots of reasons for them to target you, not directly, but indirectly to, I want somebody at this particular university, or I want somebody at this particular business. So there are lots of reasons why, even though you specifically may not be a direct target, you, given your role in an organization, you may very well be a target, and are likely to be a target. So what can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is enable multi-factor authentication. If you don't have it already, at Drexel, we mandate it for every student and every other organization that I work for. If they don't have it on when I start, it's on within the first couple of weeks that I'm there. Multi-factor authentication is that second thing. So you have to enter your username and password, and then you have to enter some other unique ID, either something that's texted to you, that's sent to your phone, or you have an app on your phone that generates these random numbers periodically. That is one of the most secure ways right now for you to keep your account locked down. One of the best things you can do is to enable multi-factor authentication. There are ways of getting around MFA sometimes, especially if the hackers are really targeting you. They can try to get you to read that number. They'll call you on the phone and get you to read that number to them, or they'll do different things to try to get access to your account. But big picture, it is a very effective way of preventing people from getting access to your resources and being able to get in. Microsoft has published this statistic that says that something like 99.9% of the attacks against their Office 365 environment would have been prevented had multi-factor authentication been enabled. So think about the reduction that presents for you from a risk perspective. It is an easy thing to do. Yes, it's a pain in the rear to have to take out your phone periodically and type in those codes. But when you think about the flip side of that, especially when it's your bank, or if you work for an organization that plays a role in a supply chain, like the guy at the construction company, really taking the time to protect yourself and your account it's worth the extra 5 seconds that it takes to open your phone up and actually put in that number. Where you can, I mentioned the SMS or text-based numbers that can be sent to you. Those are okay. They're not great. there are a lot of ways of getting access to the text messages on your phone and intercepting them. So SMS is really not the preferred way to do multi-factor authentication. If you can use one of the apps on your phone, or use something like a YubiKey or some of the other USB keys that are out there that handle that multi-factor authentication, that's the preferred way to do it. So if you really want to be anal and make sure that you're protecting yourself, those keys are some of the best things you can do. The mobile apps are a nice, convenient middle ground. If you lose the key, you're in trouble. At least with the mobile app, it makes things a little bit easier. So make sure that you use unique usernames and passwords for each site and don't reuse them. Like I said, that's a common way that attackers get in. They will find your username and password from something else that was breached, and they will keep trying it. And if you reuse it, I guarantee you it is out there and that they already have that existing username and password somewhere. So don't reuse your passwords. Instead, what you want to do is use a password manager. There are a lot of them out there. There are some that are free. There are many that are very reasonable in price. What you do is you have one master password that you use to unlock the password manager. And then it automates the process of logging in for you. You store in it all of your usernames and passwords. Everything that you put in there is encrypted. There are a lot of the different companies have third parties who are constantly trying to test to see if there are ways of breaking their password managers and getting in and getting your information. But everything is encrypted. It's a reasonably secure approach to protecting all of your information and helping ensure that you don't wind up trying to reuse passwords over and over again. They also automate the login process for you. So on mine, for example, once I log in, it stays active until I either close all my browsers or I reboot my machine. And so I only have to log in like maybe once a day, once every 2 days. And the rest of the time, every time I visit a site, it just automatically logs me in. It knows the username and password. I don't have to try to remember it. And I can then use really complex passwords that nobody's ever going to be able to guess. And again, I don't reuse the passwords. I have a unique password across all of the sites. It just makes things so much easier. And they actually, some of them even are the multi-factor authentication. So those apps can automate that process too. Takes a lot of it makes things a lot more secure, takes a lot of the burden off of you, and it really streamlines the whole process for you. So it's a smart thing to do. If you don't believe me that your username and password are likely out there, check your email address on Have I Been PWNED. That's the hacker term for owned. Go visit that website, enter your email address, and they will tell you everywhere that your email address has been used in or associated with a data breach. And if you're like me, you probably have dozens or hundreds of accounts, and periodically they will also send you an alert if your information is ever the subject of a subsequent breach. So it's a very useful resource. It's free, so it's a smart thing to do. Go check. More than likely, you will find that your username and the password that you use on a particular site is already out there. So if nothing else, if you weren't aware of it, go make sure you change that password. And if you use that password anywhere else, go make sure you at least change that password everywhere else that you use it. Stop using that password. What else can you do? Well, a lot of times the bad guys get in because, as I said, you're clicking on links, you're doing things that you're either visiting an infected website. So you want to make sure that you're going to websites that are more reputable. If it's a site that's loaded with adware or loaded with ads, or that is something that's not really that reputable, the subject matter is sketchy, or it's some random blog, it is likely that the people that are running those, so that the ad-laden sites, it's very difficult, depending on who the ad provider is, be very difficult for the ad provider to pay attention to the kinds of ads. It's actually kind of easy to inject malicious ads into the stream of ads that come out. So right there, it's an easy way to get people. But the other random, like some of the more sketchy sites or those random blogs, they're not really maintained by people who are paying attention to cybersecurity. Many of them are based off of WordPress, Joomla, or some other technology, and those things, there are vulnerabilities found in those tools all the time. If the blogger or the host of that site isn't paying attention to cybersecurity and isn't updating the contents and the underlying technologies on a regular basis, the bad guys can come in and get access to the site and implant malware on those sites. So to the best extent possible, even when you're searching online, when you go on Google and you do a search for something, look at the link before you click on it. Make sure that it's going to a reputable website. If you haven't heard about it, skim down, see if there's another website that is a site that you're more comfortable with or that you're familiar with, and go there first. See if they have the information that you need. So that reputation piece of it is still not something that Google is building in. That trustworthiness from a cyber perspective is not something that Google's really building into the search results at this time, unfortunately. But it's something that you can do. It's a really easy, low-hanging fruit for you to be able to stay more secure. On the flip side, your own personal computers. I mentioned a minute ago that there are constantly vulnerabilities found in things like Joomla and WordPress. That's true across the board of every piece of software, of every operating system. Apple, Microsoft, Linux, they are all, or sorry, Apple, Microsoft, Linux, they're all updating their versions of their tools on a regular basis, their operating systems, whether it's iOS or the Mac OS or Windows or Linux, they're all pushing out updates on a regular basis. Microsoft has what they call Patch Tuesday, which is the first Tuesday of every month. That is the day that all of the security vulnerabilities that they kind of know about have been addressed, and they're pushing all of those out so you can run those patches, update your computer, make sure that you have the latest version of the software so that you can fight off potential attacks. In some cases, security researchers reach out to a company like Microsoft or Apple and say, hey, we were probing your operating system and we found such and such a problem. And they give Apple or Microsoft the time to fix that problem before they go public with it. And both of those companies and many other companies have what are called bug bounty programs, where the security researchers can actually get paid because they're helping make the operating systems or whatever the software is more secure. So the security researchers love it, and they're willing to play the game of, okay, we're going to tell you about it, and eventually we're going to publish our research, but we'll wait until you have a fix. That's the ethical way to do it. Unfortunately, there are bad guys out there who are constantly doing the same thing, and they don't want the money and they don't care about the fame of being able to publish the fixes or the vulnerabilities. They want to use it because they're finding ways to get into their next victim, and they want to steal stuff from that victim as opposed to making money off of the security research that they're doing. So those guys, there are what are called zero-day attacks. They're previously unknown attacks that sit out there. Microsoft, Apple, et cetera, also learn about those eventually when somebody is a victim of them and they find out how the attackers got in. They publish those as well. So there are security updates that come out every month. It is really smart to make sure that you're updating and running the latest version of the operating system and running the latest version of all of the apps. If you look at your mobile device, look at all the apps that you have on there, and go to the App Store and check to see, am I running the latest version of them? I'm anal enough that every day to maybe it takes me 2 days to open the App Store, I'm constantly checking to see, are there updates on my phone? Even though I have automatic updates enabled, I go and check anyway. I'm more proactive than that because I don't want them to release an update that's sitting out there. Meanwhile, the version of the software that I'm using is older and has a vulnerability that now the attackers can use to attack my device. So I do it on my Windows machine every day, or again, every day or two, I'm running Windows Update to see, is there something else out there, something new, Same thing on my phones and on all of my mobile devices. I check them regularly. Again, I do have automatic updates enabled, but just in case, I still am anal enough that I go double check everything on a regular basis. And I would encourage you to take out your phone and swipe down and see how many new updates are available for your phone today. Or for if you're running a PC or a Mac, pull up the software updates and see, are there any updates available for your devices? I can almost guarantee you that your device probably has some updates that need to be put in place. So really smart to make sure you're doing these things to keep yourself secure. The last thing you want is for the attackers to get access to your device to be able to use it for whatever malicious purposes they want, whether it's attacking your employer or just holding your stuff ransom. So I now work for a company that, as Dr. Charles said, makes some software that helps people manage their cybersecurity programs. I used to run a cybersecurity consulting company, and one of my clients just had a problem over the weekend. There was malware found in their environment. One user was the reason that the malware got in. They hadn't updated certain things on their computer. And so the bad guys were able to come in, they were able to leverage existing vulnerabilities because that person hadn't updated the computer. And thankfully we caught it in time. The bad guys were getting ready to ransom the entire company where that employee worked. What that means is they would have encrypted, that is, locked up and jumbled up the information that this company had, and made it so only the bad guys could decrypt it. They could read it and do anything with it. It looks like we were probably only hours away from having that happen. So if you don't think this is real, if you think that it only happens to the really big companies like Facebook, it doesn't. It happens across the board. This was a company of about 65 people. So it's not a particularly large company. They're not in a particularly sensitive field either. They don't have a lot of really sensitive information, but the bad guys know that if they can get in, they can hold the business hostage and make them pay to restore their information. And so that's what it looked like the bad guys were trying to do in this case. So it's important to make sure you're patching everything. It's important to make sure you're really taking the care to maintain everything. That also means you want to remove any software that you're not using. So if you don't need it, get rid of it, because there can be 0-day vulnerabilities in any piece of software. So if it's just not there, it's better that you don't have it, and that way you remove the possibility of the attackers being able to exploit that. You also want to remove any information that you don't need. So if you're like most people, you're a pack rat when it comes to your data. You have stuff from 10 years ago, which for some of the college students may not be true, but for many of the professors, you probably have stuff from 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Do you really need that information? If not, check your companies or check the universities, their information retention policies. Make sure you get rid of it. There's no point in keeping student information or other records that you don't need, and for you to be the source of a data breach for some student. If you're like me, some of my old emails actually have not only student IDs, but in some cases other sensitive information about students, their home phone numbers, their home addresses, and some other information about certain students as well, that I'm not comfortable having in my system for any length of time, and especially not in my personal account. If the university wants to keep that information, that's a separate issue, but I don't want to be the one responsible for storing that. So I regularly purge that kind of information from my accounts. If you're a student, especially, it may be tempting to use pirated software. Please know most of the pirated software that's out there has been modified to include malware. If the people that are hacking the software are good enough to truly be able to hack the software, they're also good enough to be able to add malware to the software. It is not that difficult to do. And so it's important that you not use that pirated software. And if you've ever downloaded pirated software and tried to run it, and it turned out that the software wouldn't install, or it just didn't seem like it was running properly, the reason is that what you downloaded wasn't a copy of whatever that tool was that you thought you were using. It's not the copy of Microsoft Word or even a bootleg video. What it was malware that you were installing on your machine. So make sure that you're taking the time, understand what you're doing, be careful, be thoughtful about the steps that you're taking, because if you don't, the bad guys are going to take advantage of it. At another level, if you travel, if you're mobile, and I know COVID has kind of put a damper on this for a lot of companies and for a lot of people, but as you start getting out and moving around more, remember that public Wi-Fi is really not your friend. I have 2 portable Wi-Fi devices that I could stand up, and I can change the names on them to be whatever I want to be. So if I'm sitting at McDonald's, I could theoretically bring my Wi-Fi device with me and set it up and have it say McDonald's free Wi-Fi. And you could, anybody that's there who sees that Wi-Fi could log in. Now I have a device that's sitting in the middle of anything that they do. I might actually let them get online. I might use my phone and give them access to the internet. I can log everything that they do on that my Wi-Fi. And there are other reasons why public Wi-Fi is really not a good thing to use either. And that includes airports. That's the coffee shop. That's everywhere you go that has public Wi-Fi. It should be treated as though it is infected, like your device, if you connect to it, like your device is going to be infected with malware, because there is a high degree of likelihood that at least the attacker is listening and watching what you do. And there is actually a chance that the attackers can put malicious information into the stuff that your computer receives. So staying off of public Wi-Fi is just a really smart idea. If you have to use it, and I have been in situations where I didn't have a choice. There is one hotel that I go to on a pretty regular basis in DC. There's a conference that used to be held there every year, and the cell phone reception in that conference center was awful. And in order to be able to respond to my clients, I had to get on their Wi-Fi. I had no choice. In that case, you really want to make sure you're using a virtual private network or VPN to connect. This way, at least the communications from your device out to the internet are more likely to be secure than on just an open Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi. So the attacker is less likely to be able to see what you're doing. If you have to use it, and even if you're using a VPN, make sure you limit or preferably don't use and send any personal public information. Don't access your bank account. Don't log into your emails. Don't pull up personal health records. Really take the time to think about it. And again, treat it as though the bad guys are watching you when you're on that public Wi-Fi, even if you have the VPN in place. The more you can do to keep yourself secure, the better. At home, most of us don't use the old cable connections anymore. Most of us have Wi-Fi routers set up. Many of them, and many of those Wi-Fi routers come from our cable company or from the other internet providers. Many of those cable companies offer, if you're leasing those devices, you can trade them in and get newer versions of those devices on a regular basis. Make sure you do that. So if it's been more than 2 or 3 years since you've upgraded your router, get them to send you a new one and swap it out. The new ones have better security in them. They're better prepared for today's attacks. Believe it or not, it may not seem like long, but 3 years from a cybersecurity perspective is a lifetime. There are so many potential problems in some of those older pieces of hardware that it's really important that they get swapped out on a regular basis. Many of the new ones actually have some really cool features. My internet service provider is a well-known organization. My new router lets me log in. I actually can create 3 different networks. So I have one that I use for all of my family's stuff, the things that I really want to keep secure. that goes on that Wi-Fi, and that is encrypted or protected using what's called WPA3. It's the latest encryption standards. It's the most secure that you can get for Wi-Fi today. Not every device supports it. Not every device works well with WPA3. So they actually give you two other networks that you can create. One is a guest network, and you use that for, as its name suggests, anybody that comes to visit. You don't want to let random people, even other family members, onto your network. If you're taking the time to do all the stuff that we've talked about, you're running patches, you're running antivirus on your machines, you're doing all the things that you should be doing to keep yourself safe, the last thing you want to do is let somebody else on your network and let an infected device onto that network, because that just, there are a couple analogies I could use, but let's suffice it to say, it's like having a COVID infected person sitting next to you. Probably not the smartest thing to do. So put them on a guest network instead. So, and most of the devices come with that built in. They support that automatically. Another thing that mine actually does is it has a third Wi-Fi that's for Internet of Things devices, those smart devices like your smart TV, smart toaster, smart thermostat, etc. Those devices typically are not built with security in mind. Some are starting to get better, but many of the devices are rushed to market. They really haven't taken the time to think about security at all. And so putting those, if you're going to use them, putting them on their own network where if an attacker can get access to it, it's isolated and they can't use that as a basis for attacking your other devices is a smart thing to do. So putting in place that kind of what they call network segmentation is a really smart thing. And then enable logging there and notifications. Most of those routers, and it does take a little bit of poking around or reading the manuals, but most of the routers today actually will send alerts to you if there is a new device found on your network. That's one of the smartest things you can do, is if somebody is trying to get onto your network because you live in an apartment building or something, you're in a more densely populated area, knowing that someone is on your network and that there's a rogue unauthorized device on there is one of the easiest things you can do. You can look for it, and most of them give you the ability to kick that device off the network and block it from your network. It is an easy thing to do. It will definitely help keep you more secure. And from a proactive perspective, it's just a smart thing to put in place. So I'm going to wrap up in just a second, but as I mentioned, there are some really great videos out there. I want to recommend them to you. Dr. Charles has the slides and he can send them to you. So you can actually just click on the links. But the first one is a description of how easy it is for someone to be attacked and for someone to attack you. This guy goes to Las Vegas. He's a reporter, and he went to Las Vegas to what's called DEF CON, which is one of the biggest cybersecurity and hacker conferences in the world. He went to DEF CON and paid people to try to hack him, and he documented his experience. It's about I think a 10-minute long video, and it's definitely worth watching. My favorite is the second part. There's 3 different people that he talks to. My favorite is the second part. There's a woman. So if you want to scrub forward, you can get to the part where he's talking to the woman. That one starts around the 4-minute mark, and it's really sad, but I've watched it often enough that I know that one starts around the 4-minute mark. The second one, can you trust your fellow employees? So this CNN did something similar, but they sat with a professional, someone who does what's called social engineering, where they try to get in, not by hacking, not by attacking the computers, but actually by calling people or sending emails to people and trying to get access to corporate networks that way. And you can see what happens when this guy calls up using some free or inexpensive software to disguise who he is. And you can see how easy it is for him to get not only onto the computers, which you kind of would expect if he was calling some random person, but he actually calls their IT department, who helps the bad guy get onto the network. So really interesting to watch. That one's only a couple minutes long. And then the last one, there are a lot of different social engineering techniques out there. One of them is that people drop USB keys, and this is old cybersecurity lore from 15, 20 years ago. As USB keys were first coming out, the idea was you would put infected malware or infected files on the USB keys, and you would drop them around a campus, and somebody would eventually pick it up and plug it in, and that would give you the foothold that you needed to get on the network. Well, some guy from Google a couple of years ago actually said, you know, we've heard these stories, we hear that this happens, but it's really hard to know if that's an actual viable way of getting on a network. And I'm not going to give it away, but if you watch from about the 5 minutes and 50-second mark in, he describes what happens when they took about 300 devices and dropped them around a university campus. I am waiting for COVID to be over and to be back on campus, because I want to run something similar to this using some of my students to help me with it when we get back. But it was really fascinating to see. The short answer, I will give away that yes, it is successful. If you watch the video, you'll see they do a bunch of analyses too about what it takes to get people to actually click on them. They had some USB keys that were labeled things like final exam answers or vacation photos and different things, trying to see if it increased the likelihood of people clicking on any or opening any of the USB keys. The smart thing to do is, if you find anything like that, throw it away. It maybe if you find it on the ground, put it up someplace obvious so that if the person is retracing their steps, maybe they'll find it. But there's no guarantees that device, that USB stick, isn't infected. And so do not plug it into any of your devices, whether that's your work computer, especially your work computers, but even your home computers. Do not plug anything like that in. If it's got a name on it, wonderful, try to return it to the person who found it, but never ever plug it in. So, all right, I've been rambling on for almost 50 minutes. Dr. Charles, I'll pause there and see if there are any questions or comments from people.
Sure. So Jim, you know, I, as well as the staff and the students of Capital Technology University, would definitely like to thank you for the informative presentation. And we do have some questions. So I'll go with the first question. And I guess maybe your lawyer hat might come into this aspect right here. But basically it says, why are free tools that allow hacking not illegal? So I guess like Metasploits and the Nmaps and stuff like that.
Yeah, because they're used for good purposes too. In fact, many of them started out being used for good purposes. So in order to understand what weaknesses there are in a system, I've got to be able to probe them. And if somebody wants to take the time to write a tool that makes it easier for me to probe my tool. So my company, I work for a software company, as I mentioned, we are paying people to try to attack our system. We want to know proactively, we're paying for what's called a penetration test. We want them to come in and try to attack us. You need a good tool to be able to do that. So you need a tool like Metasploit to be able to come in and start that process. That makes it so much easier it actually reduces the cost. So from a financial perspective for my company, if I had to pay a white hat hacker, somebody who I want to come in and try to attack my system, if they had to create those tools every time, or if they had to do things by hand every time instead of using automation, that would be insanely expensive. The number of hours that they would have to spend to really target my system and attack it, it would probably be more than we could afford to spend. But because these tools exist now, what we're paying for is somebody who's familiar with the tools, who can turn around and use them to try to attack our systems. And then we get the output of that. We get the benefit of knowing what they learned, as opposed to the bad guys developing these tools, using them. And it's just like many other illegal things. The bad guys don't care that something is illegal. They're going to still develop it. They're still going to carry it. They're still going to reuse it, resell it in some cases. So they don't care that that stuff is illegal. So why not put something like this in the hands of white hat hackers and others who are trying to do the right things, and security researchers who are trying to do the right things and make the world a better place.
Okay, thank you with that one. We have another question. Thoughts on using browser password managers? How secure or not are they? Pros versus cons.
So most of the password managers that are out there today are available as plugins to browsers. Those are well architected, reasonably secure, etc. I don't really trust the browser to save my passwords. So if it's just Edge or Chrome or whatever, I don't trust that browser to save my password. Now, again, the browser plugins are a different story. If it's from a reputable organization like LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane, there are several of them out there, then I'm much more comfortable with using those.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. I learned in class that HTTPS is secure. So is using that on a free Wi-Fi bad? And also, are there any free VPN software available?
So the HTTPS is definitely a good thing. There are what are called man-in-the-middle attacks that can happen with HTTPS. So HTTPS is secure. It does establish a secure connection theoretically between your computer and the endpoint device. But there are ways of positioning malicious tools between your device and that endpoint. So it's not, while it is a good thing to use and definitely is better than going to an unsecured site, it's not the be all end all. And I wouldn't, again, my recommendation is stay off of public Wi-Fi, period, unless you have to. I pay for unlimited mobile minutes on my phone, mobile data, because I want to be able to use my phone wherever I go instead of having to rely on Wi-Fi. As far as free VPNs, I am very leery of anything that's free, because the people that are offering it for free are making money somehow. It costs money to provide those services to you. So what is it? How are they generating that revenue? What are they doing with the information that they collect from you, et cetera? Many of those password managers that I mentioned actually include VPN, so you pay an annual fee. I think I pay like $35 a year, so it's not that expensive, and I get a VPN with it too when I need to use one.
Okay. And I'll pose one last question. How safe and private is your information on the cloud? Can they access your picture files? I guess any files.
So it depends on a couple different things. If we're talking about something like OneDrive, iCloud, Google Drive, they are reasonably secure. I do use them regularly for storing my information. There's a distinct difference between those and some of the other tools that are out there, or if you open up what's called like an Amazon S3 bucket and start putting information in there, some of those other tools that are out there, those cloud storage capabilities, are not that well configured, or they require you to configure the security. And by default, many of them have security disabled. So they're really not the best, most secure thing to use. I will say something like iCloud. I know Apple's iCloud was the victim of a breach several years ago. I know Microsoft's OneDrive is regularly targeted, like on a daily basis, hourly basis. So those companies know, Google, Apple, Microsoft, they all know that this is their bread and butter. And they all learned really quickly when they suffered big breaches that this has serious financial implications for them. They are taking cybersecurity a lot more seriously than they did 5 or 10 years ago. So I am getting progressively more comfortable and confident with putting my information up there. They have security teams out there doing all the stuff that I've talked about, all the patch management, everything else. They have dedicated teams doing that all the time. So as compared to your home device, you have to ask yourself, where am I more likely to have risk? Is putting it in the cloud where they have trusted people who go through background checks and all that stuff, who are maintaining all these computers. Is that more secure, or is my home computer, and especially my home network, where I might have my kids or my other family members on that network and I don't know what they're doing on there? Or if I have roommates, God only knows if my roommates are following all the same best practices. I may actually have less risk by putting my stuff in the cloud than if I keep it locally. But that's an analysis you got to make on a case-by-case basis.
All right. Again, Jim, thank you. And we appreciate the information that you shared with us. And that's the end of our presentation. We look forward to seeing the students and staff again next week as we'll continue our Cybersecurity Awareness Month presentation series. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Charles. This was a great opportunity.
Thank you.